Okay, let's get started. Tell me a bit about your background and how you got involved in, the public sector.
Yeah, so I'm Cuban and Puerto Rican. I was born and raised in Maryland in the United States, and my parents taught me Spanish as my first language. I've also been disabled my whole life. My first disability was being hard of hearing, and I've worn hearing aids since I was a toddler. When I was 17, I was diagnosed with a progressive vision disability called Usher syndrome. It also includes a hearing disability, but the vision was new for me at that point. And today I have a small window of central vision, and I use a white cane to help me navigate the world. In terms of getting involved in the public sector, it goes all the way back to my childhood because I remember when I was in high school, I had a summer job working at a nonprofit that did programming with Latino youth. And I had served on their advisory board that summer. Even though I'm Latina, I grew up in the suburbs, and both of my parents had graduate degrees. Both of them spoke English and were English dominant. But I didn't recognize that as privilege until I was in this group with students from Washington, D.C., from Virginia, that had more of a recent history of immigration, that told stories of violence, of things going on in their schools and their communities. And so that really impacted me as far as feeling like I had all this privilege. Can I do something with it? And feeling really compelled that I should, that I definitely should. So everything since then, I feel like I've been moved to do something positive with my career path. I've always sought out impactful work that makes a difference in the world. And so the way that that turned into, or what that turned into, is I first became a teacher with Teach for America, and I was teaching bilingual education in the Bronx. That was my first job. But then later on, I left education because I was passionate about nutrition. I became a holistic health coach. I started a nonprofit program in my community, which at the time was Washington Heights and Inwood, a very Latino community. And then I realized I needed to learn more about systemic barriers within health and food access. So I closed my program and went back to work full time. I also got a graduate degree in public health. So I was working at a nonprofit. I was running a health intervention for them in Harlem, and I was getting my degree. And then after I got my degree, I got a new job at a food bank doing community engagement work in my neighborhood. And this led me to start a food justice organization along with community members. And the organization still exists today. It's sustainable without me. After that role, I transitioned into a senior management role that was focused on capacity building within food pantries and soup kitchens. So that's everything about my work in the public sector before I started the work I'm doing now.
All right, that's awesome. That's some really great stuff. Um, so I know that so like tell me a little bit about Blindish Latina, because I hear it's a pretty great organization. So I'm wondering uh, what that organization is, because you've started that recently. I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah. So if you could just
Yeah,
tell me a bit about that.
happy to share. So Blindish Latina is a business, but it didn't start out that way. I started Blindish Latina as an Instagram account in 2020. And all I wanted to do was share my story because I had become a very strong self advocate. Once I started using a white cane for blindness, I was speaking up about all of my needs. I remember that I used to go to a lot of fitness classes before the pandemic, and I would always talk to the instructor beforehand about my disability and let them know exactly how to help me. Then instead of feeling nervous during the class, I felt powered up. I felt excited. And this just allowed me to actually focus on fitness. Once I saw the impact of my self-advocacy on my life, how much better it made it, it wasn't enough for me to make an impact in only my life. I wanted to use my voice to make a greater impact on society. So that's why I started Blindish Latina and my business as a public speaker and DEI consultant. When I started the Instagram account, I just felt there weren't a lot of voices like me in the disability conversation, a professional disabled Latina woman. I wanted to create awareness among non-disabled people. It is said that knowing just one person of an identity group reduces prejudice and bias. So I wanted to be that disabled friend online for people that didn't have anyone else in their life that was disabled. So as a content creator on Instagram and now on LinkedIn, I just want to make disability real for people, to get more non-disabled people to care about disability inclusion. So sharing my story is one way that I reach people. But beyond the content creation side, I have now started a business, and that started last year. Last year, I started offering public speaking and consulting to companies. So I come in and I talk about disability awareness, inclusion, accessibility, and I do different types of things for them. Sometimes I do a fireside chat, which is a live conversation about different topics with someone from the company. Sometimes I come in to do training, like workshops or presentations. And sometimes I do keynotes, even at conferences as well. And that's just been an amazing way to continue spreading my message and giving people easy, concrete things that they can do, because I think it's not complicated. People really need to understand that they can do things right now to make workplaces and society more inclusive for us.
Uh-huh. That's cool. So I know that you just said that you're a DEI consultant and a public speaker. So like, what are some of the kinds of things that you sort of do in the community at large? Do you work on advocacy, and things of that nature, advocacy, awareness, and like how do you sort of talk about those issues within the community? Do you do you facilitate groups, discussions? How do you engage with the community in that regard?
So most of the work that I'm doing in this area really focuses on my clients. So most of my speaking is done in internal events where their employees are invited and I'm hosted on their platform. Sometimes I also do get to do events that are open to the public. So for example, last year, I was able to be a keynote speaker for the Nobility Access U conference, which I spoke virtually at, and I also spoke in person at the American Foundation for the Blind annual leadership conference, and I was an in-person keynote there. So I felt like when I get to do these types of events, I am interacting with the general public, like anyone can come. And that is really meaningful for me to also be able to do that. Upcoming this year, I'll be presenting with Deaf Blind UK. They're having a convention. In addition to those kinds of events, I see my content creation as a way to really reach the community and to advocate. I think that people don't often realize the power of stories, that how you can change someone's mindset with a story, how you can wake them up. So by putting out content consistently and making sure that they have calls to action, that they're asking people to do something different, that I think that's making a change. The other thing that I was really excited about is that earlier this year, I did a TEDx talk. And that talk was called Creating Inclusive Workplaces for All. So being on the TEDx platform, talking about disability at work is a way that I've been able to get that message on a wider platform. And I've heard from people who watched it, disabled people who say, oh, wow, I felt seen by your talk. Like I was cheering for you. I'm, sending it to my company, all of these things. So that's the way that I work to create change. And I just love kind of leaning into my gifts. In terms of other advocates, I support them, I share their messages, and I think it's really important to realize that we're not alone. We really need to be part of the larger community when it comes to disability advocacy.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that I think it's pretty important. If I could just like ask this last question here, because I know there's like a lot of stigma around disability and it can be kind of hurtful and it can, it can, affect people with disabilities in different ways. But like how would you sort of tackle the stigma of, like ableism and like mainly ableism from your perspective and your line of work?
Hmm. Tackling ableism, dismantling ableism is so important. And the way that I work on ableism is in two different ways. One is that I have a workshop that's actually just about ableism. It's called Unpacking Ableism in the Workplace. So I'm really making sure that my clients see that they need to focus on it. It's so pervasive, it's really damaging and hurtful, just like you said. So that's something that I'm introducing in all of my workshops, even my beginning disability awareness workshop. I define ableism, I give examples, I ask others to give examples. And I think that's really impactful because I am making sure that they learn about it and recognize it. But a lot of times when it comes to stigma, we have different things going on. People are uncomfortable when they talk about disability. They don't want to talk about it, or, they just don't understand. They feel like they're going to say or do the wrong thing. So that's something that with awareness and providing a safe space and conversation during my workshops and trainings and session that I can really tackle so that disability is not something that's ignored. Because I think when we focus on the workplace, people often look for a quick fix when it comes to diversity training. They're like, oh, we did a training, we're done. That's not how it works. You need to be engaged in a long-term learning journey. So that requires more than one session, that requires more time. So I think that one thing that I do that's helpful is I try to bring people in for a series. I recommend to them, don't just book me for one, book me for the whole series so that you can make sure you go through this whole learning journey. But definitely, I think what we have to deal with in society is huge. We have so many barriers, even just to getting our voices heard. We have algorithm bias where sometimes content creators, they're creating amazing content, but they're not getting shown. And that's really challenging when you're trying to create change. But I think that for the companies that I work with, I want to see them all invest in disability inclusion. They need to recognize that disability is part of the natural diversity of humankind. It's part of life. And it's not anything that's bad. It just is. And we need to make a better world for everyone. Accessibility needs to be a non-negotiable. It needs to be mandatory from the beginning. So one thing I also want to see is just people really need to start questioning their assumptions about disabled people. So for example, people in the workplace might think, oh, a disabled employee can't handle a hard project, or they can't handle a leadership position. And that is really harmful. That needs to be a conversation with the disabled person. Let them tell you what they can handle. Let them tell you what they're ready for and what support they need. Let's not make these assumptions that hold everyone back.
Yeah, that I think it's really important. I had this conversation with a friend the other day where she basically said that when it comes to like in in our society, there's a system in which it's not adequately built for people with disabilities. Like that there should be ways to sort of make things more accessible and more inclusive, like you said. So, but we there needs to be like better work on that front, and sort of like we need to be sort of the leaders in that regard.
Definitely.